Today, the nation pauses to honor for extraordinary lives, each leaving an indelible mark on culture, sport, media, and innovation. Kevin Arkadie, whose storytelling reshaped police dramas on television, gave a voice to a new generation of narratives. Vincent Zampella, a visionary of the gaming world, transformed interactive entertainment into cinematic art. Joseph Russo, the Ice Warrior, exemplified perseverance and grace on the rink, inspiring countless athletes with his dedication. And Louis Cannon, a journalist of unflinching integrity, chronicled the corridors of power with honesty and clarity. Their passing reminds us that while life is fleeting, the legacies of creativity, leadership, discipline, and truth endure, shaping generations long after they leave us. The news arrived quietly, confirmed without spectacle. On a winter morning, when television sets across America replayed familiar scenes from shows that once felt urgent and alive, Kevin Arkadie had passed away on December 17, 2025 at the age of 68. For many viewers, his name was not always front and center, but his voice had been there all along, shaping stories that reflected the streets, the tensions, and the human cost behind a badge. Kevin Arkadie's journey began far from Hollywood sound stages. He grew up in Washington, D.C., a city defined by power, politics, and unseen struggles. As a young man, he paid close attention to people. He listened to conversations on buses, in courtrooms, and in neighborhood bars. Those early observations would later become the backbone of his writing. In his early career, Arkadie faced the same uncertainty that greets many young writers. Doors did not open easily, scripts were rewritten, rejected, and rewritten again. Yet those who knew him during that time recall his calm persistence. One former colleague later said, "Kevin never rushed the process. He believed the story would speak when it was ready." His breakthrough came through television, a medium he respected deeply. Arkadie believed television had the power to reach people who might never see their lives reflected on screen. This belief guided his work as he began writing for major network dramas where realism was often softened for comfort. He quietly pushed back against that trend. On NYPD Blue, Arkadie helped shape a new kind of police drama. The show did not shy away from moral conflict or emotional fallout. Officers were flawed, burdened, and human. Arkadie's writing leaned into silence as much as dialogue, allowing moments to breathe. The series would go on to earn critical praise, including Emmy nominations, with Arkadie recognized for his contribution to its emotional depth. His work on Chicago Hope further revealed his range. Though set in a hospital rather than a precinct, the series explored similar themes of responsibility and consequence. Arkadie's episodes focused less on spectacle and more on choice. A producer from the show once reflected, Kevin wrote doctors the way he wrote cops. He made them human first. Perhaps his most defining contribution came with New York Undercover. At a time when diverse casting was still treated as a risk, Arkadie stood firm. The series centered Black and Latino detectives in New York City, not as side characters, but as the heart of the story. Their lives outside the job mattered just as much as their work on the streets. Arkadie believed representation was not a trend, but a responsibility. He fought for authentic voices in the writer's room and on screen. One actor from the series later shared, "Kevin listened when we spoke about our experiences. He didn't adjust them to fit television. He adjusted television to fit the truth." Behind the scenes, Arkadie was known as steady and thoughtful. He was not the loudest voice in the room, but when he spoke, people paid attention. He valued collaboration and trusted his partners, including his creative work alongside Dick Wolf. Together, they shared a belief that procedural stories could carry emotional weight without losing realism. Despite accolades and nominations, Arkadie never chased the spotlight. Friends describe him as private, grounded, and deeply loyal. He preferred long conversations to public appearances. When praised for his work, he often redirected credit to the team. Television is a shared effort. He once said in an interview, "No story stands alone." As the industry changed, Arkadie adapted without losing his core values. He mentored younger writers, encouraging them to write honestly, even when it felt uncomfortable. A former mentee recalled a simple piece of advice: "If it feels easy, you're probably not done yet." In later years, Arkadie stepped back from the constant pace of production, but his influence remained visible. Shows inspired by his approach continued to emerge, grounded in realism and respect for character. Viewers might not have known his name, but they recognized the tone he helped define. When news of his passing spread, tributes appeared quietly across social media. Writers, actors, and fans shared scenes that stayed with them for years. 1. Post-read, Kevin Arkadie taught us that crime stories are really about people. We feel that loss today. Kevin Arkadie lived with dignity and passed with the same quiet grace that defined his career. He did not seek to be remembered as a Legend, yet his work left a lasting mark on television storytelling. Through his words, voices once overlooked were heard, and stories once ignored were given space to exist. As the screens fade to black on the episodes he helped create, his legacy remains in every honest line of dialogue and every character written with care. Kevin Arkadie may be gone, but the stories he shaped continue to speak, reminding us that truth, when told with respect, never truly disappears. The confirmation came softly, shared first in quiet messages across the gaming world before headlines followed. On December 21, 2025, Vincent Zampella passed away, leaving behind a silence felt not in one place, but across millions of screens. For many, the news felt personal, as if a familiar guide through imagined worlds was suddenly gone. Vincent Zampella's story began long before studios and global releases. As a young boy, he was drawn to early video games, not just for play, but for possibility. He was fascinated by how simple pixels could create tension, excitement, and escape. Those close to him later said he didn't just play games, he studied them. In his early years, Zampella was known as curious and focused. While others chased trends, he chased feeling. He wanted games to feel alive, responsive, and meaningful. That mindset followed him as he entered the gaming industry, where competition was fierce and innovation carried real risk. The turning point came with the co-founding of Infinity Ward. Alongside a small team, Zampella set out to build something different. At the time, first-person shooters were popular but predictable. He believed they could be more grounded, more cinematic, and more human. That belief became Call of Duty. When it launched, it changed expectations overnight. The game brought players into the chaos of conflict with intensity and detail that felt new. Its pacing, sound design, and emotional weight set a new standard. One early developer recalled, Vincent wanted every moment to feel earned, nothing was allowed to feel empty. Call of Duty did more than succeed. It reshaped the genre. It influenced how shooters were made, marketed, and experienced. Yet behind the success, Zampella remained focused on craft. He pushed teams hard, but always with purpose. He believed excellence came from care, not pressure alone. After leaving Infinity Ward, Zampella co-founded Respawn Entertainment. For many, this move defined his legacy even more deeply. Respawn was built on trust, freedom, and respect for creators. Zampella encouraged teams to take risks, even when failure was possible. At Respawn, innovation thrived. Games like Titanfall introduced movement and flow that felt revolutionary. Later, Apex Legends showed how competitive games could remain accessible and evolving. Zampella supported bold ideas but insisted they serve the player experience. A designer who worked under him once said, Vincent didn't micromanage, he asked questions, and those questions made your work better. His leadership style was calm, thoughtful, and deeply human. He listened more than he spoke. Zampella also played a guiding role at Ripple Effect Studios, where his influence extended beyond any single title. He mentored younger developers, reminding them that technology mattered less than intention. He often said that mechanics were tools, but emotion was the goal. Despite his status, Zampella avoided the spotlight. He rarely spoke in dramatic terms about his success. In interviews, he credited teams and emphasized collaboration. Great games are made by people who feel safe to create, he once shared. Colleagues often described his perfectionism, but also his generosity. He demanded quality, but he also protected creative space. One producer reflected online after his passing, saying, Vincent pushed us to be better, but he never made us feel small. As gaming grew into a global culture, Zampella understood its responsibility. He believed games could connect people across borders and backgrounds. His projects reflected that belief, offering shared experiences shaped by choice, challenge, and immersion. When news of his death spread, tributes poured in from developers, players, and industry leaders. Many shared screenshots, memories, and quiet thanks. A fan wrote, Vincent Zampella built worlds where we learned teamwork, focus, and resilience. For those who worked closest to him, the loss was deeply personal. One former teammate shared, he cared about the people behind the screens just as much as the players in front of them. That balance defined his career. Vincent Zampella did not just create games. He shaped how games were made and why they mattered. His influence can be felt in every smooth mechanic, every story-driven mission, and every team empowered to take a risk. Though he is gone, the worlds he helped build remain alive. Players continue to explore them, compete within them, and find meaning in them. In that sense, his work never truly ends. Vincent Zampella's life was marked by imagination, discipline, and quiet leadership. He leaves behind a legacy written, not in words, but in moments of play shared by millions as the screens fade and controllers rest. His impact continues, remembered with gratitude by a community he helped define. The news settled slowly across the hockey world, shared in quiet conversations and simple statements. Joseph Rousseau had passed away, and with him went a chapter of the sport defined by discipline, grace, and resolve for those who followed the game closely. The loss felt like the dimming of a steady, trusted light. Joseph Rousseau was born in Canada, where winter shaped both the land and the people. From a young age, ice was his classroom, skates were learned early, and lessons came through long mornings and cold evenings spent chasing improvement rather than applause. Those close to him later said he never spoke much about talent. He spoke about work. As a young player, Rousseau stood out not for show, but for control. His movements were precise. His decisions were calm. Coaches noticed that he read the game one step ahead, rarely wasting energy or motion. Even then, he played with a sense of purpose that hinted at something greater. His first moment on the world stage came at the 1960 Winter Olympics. Wearing his country's colors, Rousseau helped lead his team to a silver medal. The achievement marked him as a player of international promise, but he treated it as a beginning, not a peak. In a later interview, he reflected simply, saying, "It taught me what it means to play for something bigger than yourself." Soon after, Rousseau joined the Montreal Canadiens, a franchise rich with history and expectation. The pressure was intense, especially for a young player entering such a storied locker room. Yet Rousseau adapted quickly. He listened, learned, and earned respect through consistency rather than words. In 1962, his efforts were recognized with the Calder Memorial Trophy, awarded to the league's top rookie. The honor brought attention, but it did not change him. Teammates recall that he returned to practice the next day with the same quiet focus. One former teammate later said, "Joe never played to impress, he played to win and to help others." Win two over the next 14 seasons, Rousseau became a cornerstone of the Canadiens. His time with the team was marked by 4 Stanley Cup victories, each one earned through teamwork and trust. He understood his role and fulfilled it with discipline. When the moment called for leadership, he answered without raising his voice on the ice. Rousseau was known for his resilience. He absorbed pressure without complaint and responded with steady play. Injuries were part of the game, but he rarely spoke of pain. Instead, he focused on recovery and return. To younger players watching, his example spoke louder than any speech off the ice. Rousseau carried himself with humility. He avoided attention and preferred routine to celebration. He believed respect was something built slowly, through effort and fairness. A longtime trainer once shared, "Joe treated everyone the same, from rookies to veterans." That's why people trusted him. As his career progressed, Rousseau naturally became a mentor. Younger players gravitated toward him, not because he demanded authority, but because he offered guidance. He stayed late after practice, answering questions and sharing small insights about positioning, timing, and mindset. One former player recalled, "He taught us how to stay calm when the game got loud." Rousseau believed the spirit of hockey mattered as much as winning. He spoke often about respect for opponents and officials. He saw the game as a shared responsibility, passed from one generation to the next. In a rare public comment, he once said, "You don't own this game, you borrow it and you give it back better." As seasons passed, his role shifted, but his influence did not fade even when his minutes changed. His presence remained steady. Coaches valued his reliability. Knowing he would deliver exactly what the team needed, fans admired him for the same reason. He was dependable in a sport built on uncertainty. When Rousseau eventually stepped away from the game, he did so without ceremony. There were no dramatic announcements, only gratitude. He left knowing he had given his best years to the sport. He loved those years, however, continued to echo through the teams and players he helped shape. In retirement, Rousseau stayed connected to hockey, often watching quietly from the stands or offering private advice. He avoided public roles, choosing instead to support from a distance. Friends say he found peace in that balance, proud but never boastful. News of his passing brought an outpouring of quiet tributes. Former teammates shared old photos and simple words of thanks. One message read, "Joseph Rousseau showed us how to compete with honor." Another fan wrote, "He was the kind of player you wanted your kids to learn from." For the hockey community, his death marked the loss of more than a champion. It marked the passing of values that defined an era. Precision, resilience, and leadership were not just traits he displayed. They were principles he lived by. Joseph Rousseau's legacy is written in championships, but also in character. It lives on in the players he guided and the standards he upheld. His story reminds the sport of what it means to play with heart and restraint. As the ice resets for each new season, his influence remains beneath the surface. Steady and enduring, Joseph Rousseau is remembered not only as an ice warrior, but as a guardian of the game's soul, and in that memory his presence Continues, calm and unbroken, long after the final horn. The confirmation came late in the evening, shared first among newsrooms before reaching the public. On December 19, 2025, Lewis Cannon passed away, closing a life spent watching power closely and reporting it carefully. For journalists who followed his work, the moment carried a quiet weight, like the final line of a long and faithful record. Lewis Cannon was born in 1933, in a time when newspapers were trusted companions in daily life. From an early age, he was drawn to words and to the idea that truth, when handled with care, could shape understanding. He believed facts mattered not as weapons, but as tools for clarity. That belief would guide his entire career. He began his path in journalism with patience and discipline. Reporting was not glamorous in his early years. It meant long hours, careful notes, and constant verification. Cannon learned to listen closely and speak sparingly. Those habits earned him trust, long before they earned him recognition. His rise at the San Jose Mercury News marked a turning point. As state bureau chief, Cannon became known for his steady presence and detailed reporting. He approached state politics with focus and restraint, never rushing a story for attention. Colleagues recall that he treated every assignment as important, regardless of its size. Cannon later moved to the Washington Post, where he served as a senior White House correspondent. The role placed him close to the center of American power, especially during the Reagan administration. From that position, he reported not with drama, but with precision. He believed readers deserved understanding, not spectacle. During those years, Cannon covered policy debates, political shifts, and moments of national consequence. His writing was clear and measured, avoiding unnecessary tone. One fellow correspondent once said, "Lewis never chased the headline, he chased the truth, and the headline followed." Cannon's reporting during the Reagan era stood out for its balance. He asked firm questions but maintained respect for the office he covered. He understood that journalism required distance, not detachment. His stories reflected that balance, offering insight without assumption behind the scenes. Cannon was deeply committed to the craft. He reviewed documents carefully and questioned his own conclusions. He often reminded younger reporters that certainty was earned, not assumed. In a newsroom conversation remembered by many, he once said, "If you're too sure, you haven't checked enough." Mentorship became a defining part of his later career. Younger journalists sought him out for guidance, not because he demanded authority, but because he offered patience. He read drafts carefully, offered quiet suggestions, and encouraged clarity over cleverness. One former protege shared, "Lewis taught us that accuracy is a form of respect." Cannon believed journalism was a public service. He spoke often about responsibility, reminding colleagues that their work shaped public trust. For him, journalism was not about opinion, but about record. He believed history deserved a careful witness. Despite his proximity to power, Cannon remained personally modest. He avoided attention and preferred his work to speak for itself. Friends say he rarely spoke about his achievements. Instead, he asked questions about others and stayed curious well into his later years. As the media landscape changed, Cannon did not resist progress, but he held firm to core values. Speed, he believed, should never replace care. Even as deadlines tightened, he urged reporters to slow down long enough to be right. His advice became a steady reminder in an increasingly fast-moving field. In private moments, Cannon reflected on the role of the press in a democracy. He believed transparency was essential, but so was fairness. He often said journalism should illuminate, not inflame. Those words stayed with many who worked alongside him. When news of his passing spread, tributes arrived from across the journalism world. Former colleagues shared memories of late nights in the press room and early mornings chasing confirmation. One message read, "Lewis Cannon showed us how to stand close to power without becoming part of it." Another former reporter wrote online, "He never raised his voice, but people listened. That was his strength." These reflections echoed a common theme. Cannon's influence was quiet, steady, and lasting. For readers, his legacy lives in the stories that helped explain complex moments in American governance. His reporting offered context when confusion was easy. He believed citizens deserved facts presented with honesty and restraint. Lewis Cannon's career spanned decades, but his values never shifted. He treated journalism as a moral calling, one rooted in truth and responsibility. He understood that trust, once broken, was hard to rebuild, and he guarded it carefully. As newsrooms continued to evolve, his example remains a guidepost. Young reporters still learn from his work, studying how clarity can coexist with depth. His influence extends beyond bylines and archives, living on in standards he helped uphold. Lewis Cannon passed away having fulfilled his role as a witness to history. He leaves behind a legacy of integrity, patience, and service to the public record. In remembering him, journalism remembers its purpose. As the press is quiet and screens dim, his words remain steady and true. Louis Cannon is remembered not only for the power he covered, but for the honesty with which he covered it, and in that memory, his voice continues to inform, long after the final story was filed.